Hey, I'm back. I bet you wondered if I'd ever make a second video after the first one. I was pretty nervous making the first video in this series of BookTube videos, but I am back, and thanks for the encouragement. We'll see how well this one goes after the first one. By the way, I when a friend of mine saw the first video, she said to me, most people on BookTube sit in front of all of their bookshelves. And she said, I think you just broke a rule. Maybe I did. But to be honest with you, I don't have any bookshelves in here right now because this is my home office and I'm redoing it. So there's not much in here right now, but I have a lot of my books in boxes and a bookshelf downstairs. So eventually I will reorganize bookshelves here in my office. And actually I thought maybe that'll be a good video. As I put books away, we can talk about some of them and kind of go through that process as well. So at this time of year, I know everybody makes lists, their favorite books, their worst books, whatever else. And I decided that what I was going to do is make a couple of videos about my favorite books of the year 2024 in no particular order. And then I decided that I had to figure out what were my favorite books of the past year. So what I did is I went back to my Goodreads account and I just looked at all of the books that I gave a 5-star ranking to. And that was interesting too. It reminded me about some of the books that I've read this year, and a few of them I want to share with you. So I'm just going to do 5 of them today, and if this works, we'll do another 5. How about that? So the first book, and I've got some notes here too, because, the memory isn't quite what it used to be. All right, so the first book I want to talk about, one of my favorites of 2024, was The Last Founding Father, James Monroe and a Nation's Call to Greatness. It is written by Harlow, Giles, Unger. Now, most people, at least I, had never read a whole lot about former President James Monroe. Among all of the presidents that we've had here in the United States, there's not been a whole lot written about James Monroe. Yet there are certain things that I think we learned about him in school, at least tangentially, thank you, and they're worth noting in this book. So he, following the War of 1812, he was really focused on getting the country moving forward again. The era of good feelings, he called it. And there's a whole lot in this book that are related to that. We also, I remember when I was in school, I read about the Monroe Doctrine. And, I've long forgotten the Monroe Doctrine, and I couldn't even remember what it was all about. But in case you have forgotten, it was basically a philosophy, a statement that if there was any European intervention in the Western Hemisphere, that would be the equivalent of attacking the Americas, and the United States would respond accordingly. Now, when you think about it, that's very similar to the NATO treaty alliance that exists today, where if anyone attacks a NATO member, then all NATO members have agreed to respond and defend their NATO colleague. So the book walks us through a lot of Monroe's philosophy, his leadership, and a bit about his personal life. I found this to be a very interesting book. I admitted in the last video that I like reading about American presidents, and this was a good book because, as I said, Monroe is not someone that is frequently discussed. I did write down a couple of quotes from the book. Whenever I read a book, I always am making notes of quotes I want to capture, and I have 2 of them to share with you. One is, the author writes about Monroe, he was the most beloved president after Washington. He was the only president other than Washington to win re-election unopposed. Think about that. Someone running for president unopposed. Unthinkable by today's standards. Second quote, Monroe went to list his priorities as president, unifying the nation, strengthening the nation's defenses, and expanding the economy with programs to encourage road and canal construction, manufacturing, and Agriculture. So The Last Founding Father, good book about James Monroe. I'm glad I read it. Second book I want to talk about, another favorite of 2024, Right Thing, Right Now, Justice in an Unjust World by Ryan Holiday. And I know many of you are familiar with Ryan Holiday's works. I've been a big fan of his writing for a long time. This is the third book that he has written about Stoic virtues. And I think Holiday has done a whole lot to sort of get Stoicism on the front burner of a lot of people's minds. There's been more written about Stoicism in recent years, and I think it's because Holiday has done such a good job with the first two books, and I really liked this book as well. Just like in his two previous outings, I mean, what he's doing is he's showing how Stoic values apply in our current day lives. And one of the things I like about his style of writing is he, and other authors do this too, but I think Holiday really nails this. He comes up with really unique stories, stories that we may or may not be familiar with, and ties them back to the Stoic philosophy. And I think that's a very powerful way of telling these stories and makes you think a whole lot. And this book really made me think a lot about my values and the way I behave. So a couple of quotes from this book as well. Justice stares us in the face. Do we act with it? Not only in big moments of responsibility, but the little ones. How we treat a stranger, how we conduct our business, the seriousness with which we take our obligations, the way we do our job, the impact we have on the world around us. Good quote. Another one. The pursuit of justice does not always begin in far-flung places. It begins at home. It begins with you. It begins with a decision about who you are going to be. This was a 5-star book in my estimation, and this is, of course, by Ryan Holiday. If you're not familiar with his work, I would really encourage you to find some books that he has written. Next book, The Situation Room by George Stephanopoulos. Now, I think many of us know George Stephanopoulos from hosting a very popular morning TV show here in the States. But what not everyone knows is that before he got into television and journalism, he worked in the White House. He was a senior advisor to President Bill Clinton. And the focus of this book is on the Situation Room. It's a room that exists in the White House where they have all of the communication gear so that the president can stay in touch with troops all around the world and monitor hotspots around the globe. And the reason he focuses on this room, I mean, the physical room is one thing, and he does describe it. It's what has gone on in that room, what discussions have taken place, not only among President Clinton, but by other presidents as well. And he's interviewed a lot of people, told some great stories. I mean, you know, some of the stories that he tells, I was not familiar with the depth of discussion that went into some of the decisions that were made by our presidents. So this is a really good book if you're interested in behind the scenes of the White House, which I am, or crisis management. I think we learn a lot about how different presidents managed difficult situations. Good book to read, The Situation Room by George Stephanopoulos. Now, I was, in continuing my effort to read more books about American presidents, there's a lot of books out there about President Reagan. And of course, Reagan has, I think now, developed hero worship status among many people in American politics. He's quoted all the time and given credit for so many things that he did during his administration. Well, Luke Cannon, who's a very prolific author, wrote this book called President Reagan, The Role of a Lifetime. And it's a 900-page book, as I recall. It's not like just a quick overnight read. And it's really less of a biography of Reagan and more of a behind-the-scenes look at the man and how he carried out business. Even though he's been given credit for doing a lot of wonderful things, we really see a side of Reagan that not everybody talks about. The fact that he relied very heavily on his staff, that he was almost a performer in the role. Now, of course, he did have a background as a Hollywood actor, but, the book alludes to the fact that, he was very good at presenting information to the public, telling jokes, coming off very folksy, but a lot of the heavy lifting that was being done during his administration were being done by his staff members. So a lot of good anecdotes in this book as well. It really gets into a deep dive on his communication and his management style. So President Reagan, The Role of a Lifetime by Lou Cannon. And I want to talk about one more book in the segment before we go on way, way too long. This is a book called Nuclear War, a Scenario by Annie Jacobsen. Wow. As I said, I don't read a fiction for the most part. And so as a result, I don't get scared by a lot of the things I read. Science fiction and fiction in general sometimes just kind of grabs you and gets you really involved in the story. You see that less in nonfiction. But this book grabbed my attention, and I got to tell you, it freaked me out a little bit. Jacobsen spent more than a decade interviewing experts on nuclear technology, how nuclear technology has evolved, its potential now in terms of being used as a tool of war, the fact that so many more nations have nuclear weaponry, as do some non-state users. And she paints a scenario about just how hard or just how easy it would be for the world to be destroyed. She has a timeline scenario which focuses on what would happen if even a nuclear bomb was launched by mistake, how other nations would react and how quickly they would react, and how once that first nuclear bomb goes off, it could mean the end of the world as we know it today. This is not a book that you want to read before you go to bed at night, because it will really, really scare you and sober you a little bit about the kind of world that we live in today. So look, those are 5 books that I really liked during 2024. I've got 5 more that I'll share in a future video. As I described in my first video, I'm new to this. This is only video number 2, and I would really appreciate your encouragement to keep going with this. What can I do to make this channel of value to you? There's a billion other booktubers out there, and I would just like to carve out my little niche, but it'll be helpful for me to know what you'd like to see in future videos like this. Maybe you're getting a sense of my personality and the kinds of things I like to read, and I'll continue making videos. But please subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment, reach out to me, and because I'd love to get your feedback as well. All right, thanks very much for joining me today. Keep reading, and we'll talk to you soon.